All right, well, Glenn, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I don't know if you want to try and make sure we got everything straight with your double setup now that it's live.
Yeah. Okay, it says that you host disabled participant screen sharing.
All right, let me go change that. Participants.
Good evening, Myrna.
Hi, Myrna. Try now.
Now it lets me, looks like. You should be seeing.
Yep, we're good.
All right, it still looks like it won't let me. There it goes. Okay, now it's loaded. No, it's not. There it goes. All right, it looks like it finished loading. Looks like I have to, it takes a little bit of time to load.
Okay. You think that's like on Zoom's end? I guess, yeah, I guess it would be.
But it looks like, I'm gonna switch away from it. And then switch back and see if it still does that. Yeah, now it looks like it's loaded now, so
Okay.
it looks fine. Okay. Hey, Nancy.
Let's see, make sure I have all my stuff together here. Wonder. Just make sure I got all the browser windows like they need to be. My secret spy documents not on my desktop before I share them.
And for some reason, I had my hand up. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know what that, I was trying to click on it. I wasn't sure what that was about, but
Apparently, that's how you're supposed to let the host or whoever know that, or let somebody know you're trying to say something, kind of like the
right.
airplane. But apparently, when I was fooling around earlier, I must have clicked on the raise my hand icon and didn't.
Yeah, I see where it is now. Okay. Well, there's no orchid icons in here for us to respond to things with. Oh well. Yeah, maybe there is. Let's see. No, sadly no. Some flower ones. There we go.
See a flower. So just let me know once I get to talking if it starts breaking up for some reason, because I'm on my cell phone. Again, the reception's usually good here, but if we get a thunderstorm coming through, that could change.
Well, just after we got off earlier, I was just looking on Twitter, and it looked like there were some parts of Baton Rouge that were getting a ton of rain.
Yeah.
Like now, or 15 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, we've been, I mean, it's humid and overcast and kind of had some dark clouds roll through when we were on the phone earlier, but nothing, it didn't ever rain. So we may or may not get out of it.
How much rain did y'all get total with the storm up there?
It never, I mean, we got a good bit of rain on, when was that? Today's Wednesday, must have been yesterday.
Monday night, first rolled in.
It rolled, Monday night it rained a good bit, but I think on Tuesday during the day it rained a lot here. Because when I got home from work, the ditches were full. It was a lot, had been a good bit of rain. And then today it doesn't look like it rained hardly at all here.
And I poured 3.5 inches out of our rain gauge Tuesday morning, and then I poured like 3.25 out this morning. So we had very, very near 7 inches of rain, and I guess 36 hours or so.
Yeah, we have about a diameter, a big oak tree. We got a bunch of big oak trees here, but one in the front yard's about a 3+ foot diameter.
Mm-hmm.
And during the first storm, there's the top of it forks into 4 sections. 2 of the 4 sections fell during the first hurricane.
A water oak?
2 of them, no, it was a big red oak.
Okay.
And then where they broke off, the other 2, one was like a wishbone, one way and one the other. And I could hear it cracking yesterday afternoon, evening.
That's
and
not
last
a good
night,
sound.
yeah, last night, one half of the wishbone broke off and fell.
Wow.
And then is over the power line, and it's still up there. So
y'all have power? Well, I guess you do.
Yeah, we have power. We got power back after 2 or 3 days. But yeah, if that last fork falls, I won't have power.
When the last fork falls, it sounds like.
Yeah, the trim and the tree people said they couldn't be here till the 27th or 28th. So if it'll make it 2 weeks, then we'll be okay. But I don't know if it's going to make it that long.
We lost some pretty big limbs, but you know, we lost tons of trees in Gustav, and but we just don't have the trees to lose like we used to. We lost I think it's called a bird's eye cherry. It's always full like blue jays and stuff that it's got this little red fruit on it. But anyway, it went over, but we didn't lose anything real big. We lost some limbs out of some big water oaks, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Piles of stuff.
Yeah, it filled up that branch. I mean, these branches are bigger than most trees.
Right.
It's like started out about, I don't know, 80 feet tall or so, maybe a little higher. And so when that sucker fell, it didn't look that big up in the air, but on the ground, sucker's huge.
I believe it. Yeah, I know what you mean. We've got some big limbs that, yeah, they're up there and you don't really notice them, but when they're down on the ground, you're very glad you weren't there when they fell.
Yeah. You said you had a vanilla cutting. How long have you had the cutting?
This one came off of a healthy plant that I had that I started to neglect after a couple of years. My problem with it became that it was that I did not have it planted properly, and so I didn't have a structure to grow it on. And you know, they get big, and like became like a pain to be moving it around, and I didn't. Anyway, it was so most of it died due to neglect, but I kept a piece of it and I rooted another piece and gave it to somebody. But it's just, I think I need to start over. I don't even know if that one's still alive. It's not putting out roots. It's just kind of laying on my orchid bench. But because I mean, I guess I had a couple of years with, at least 2 years with it when, to my eye at the time, knowing a lot less than I do now and still not knowing much, but that it seemed like it should have like thought about blooming. I don't know, because it was a big plant, but it didn't seem particularly interesting. How long? Well, never mind. I'm not going to ask. I'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. I just want to get a little background and see what you had going on.
You know, I planted it in like a one of those Vanda boxes with just that I had some orchid mix in because I didn't know what I was doing, and but you know, that did with the sort of the hanging bit to that box, I had kind of a little bit of a frame to put it on, but it just kind of quickly outgrew that, and I never really adjusted to its real size.
Yeah. Looks like we got 6 or 8 people on board.
Let's see. Yeah. People are showing up. I just set this computer up here today, and I really didn't think much about my background. I really should have paid more attention. I'm not going to get a good room review.
Yeah, just go stick it on blur, and it won't be as obvious.
That's a good idea. I should do that.
Actually, they say that people spend a lot of time distracted and looking at the background. That's why they created that blur thing. Hadn't always been there. There was a lot of
focused
research that suggested people were spending time looking at the background instead of paying attention to the conversation.
I believe it.
Do I pass?
Hey,
You
Bob,
always.
flying colors.
Thank you.
There is no failure from my point of reference. Well, it seemed like I haven't seen you guys in forever. How you doing, Hal? Look
Hello.
at Hal hiding his background.
There it is.
Well, I haven't seen you out in a while anyway.
Yeah. How you doing, Bob?
Well, thank you.
I hear James.
He snuck in.
I snuck in.
Yeah, you did.
Oh,
I haven't been there in a while. Oh, okay, you want to see?
There you are.
I'm still clicking. Okay. Hey, Al, Frank,
Hello, hello.
Oh,
Nancy. Hey, Patty, you don't have your picture up. Lotta,
Hi.
Frank. So we all,
James, I heard you don't have to worry about your glasses fogging up anymore.
from what? Oh,
Fogging up, man. Humidity.
oh. Now they fog up with a mask on. I don't care what you do.
That's true.
But we had 11% today. We're all right.
How's the smoke out there?
Clearing pretty good right now. It's a little hazy this afternoon, but this morning you can see the mountains just as clear. Then the wind blew in. Then I got out of it again. Yeah. So I went in the garage and potting up some more plants. So I got the last box in today,
How's your greenhouse doing?
full.
Imagine that.
Well, I'm getting 84 to 86 during the day, and I'm still keeping it 54 at night without a heater or anything. But it's getting about 50 at night. I mean, so it's all right, yeah. So other than that, you just got to go out there and mist them with a fine mister a couple times a day until I put my misters on the ceiling with a timer, because they dry out, 3 or 4 times a day.
Are you putting your mister under your benches or up in the ceiling?
I put them up in the ceiling and wet the leaves of the plants instead of trying to wet the mix. The mix is staying wet 3 days or so, but the leaves are drying out, especially just getting them in, keep them from dehydrating. I'm just going out there, hitting with like a fogging nozzle 3 or 4 times a day until I get the timer put in and get the misters working on the timer, because here it's dry. I mean, I misted them 10 minutes ago. I go out there in 10 minutes, the leaves will be dry, but they absorbed everything. I assumed they did.
They've evaporated.
Yeah.
Evaporated, one or the other. But
Yeah.
some of the first boxes I got new roots already, so I'm glad they putting out roots. So, but I don't have all them fails like you got behind you, Hal.
That's from 2 springs ago, I think.
Oh, okay.
That's not a new picture, I assure you.
Oh, okay. Well, I haven't got in the fail business yet because I've still got what I want, but I got room for 6 fails one day.
well, I guess we go to a couple more minutes and see if a few more people don't log on. I know
You
it's-
cut it, Frank.
No, I was just saying that I was going to give it a couple more minutes and see if a few more people logged on. It's been a lot going on, so give people I know, huh? Rain, storms. It's been a mess. So, and are
Can
we?
you send some of that rain this way, Frank?
You could have it. I poured 3 1/4 inches out this morning of the rain gauge, 3 1/2 inches out yesterday. So
We had
Yeah,
a quarter
wish we
inch in
could
the
share.
last 3 months. A quarter
Yeah.
inch in 3 months. So we're doing real good. We
Wow.
might get some more this weekend, maybe. They say 1/10 of an inch or so.
a misting. Well, your orchids will love it.
I got to mist them because they can't get in the rain because I got it closed up. And the wet wall's working good, Hal.
I bet so.
So,
James, did you make any unusual modifications to the wet wall?
no, other than put a little shade behind it because the sun's coming in from the that angle. And I just put a little shade, made a canopy behind it about a foot out, hanging down to block it so it doesn't, sun don't heat the wet wall as much. Not that it affected it, I don't think, I don't know. Still coming through at 61 degrees. So,
You made a wet wall, James, or you bought
Yeah.
one?
no, I made it. I took my radial chop saw bench with 2 rails on it, had a piece of angle aluminum and start bending sheet metal. And sheet metal shop here says that they can get to me in about 3 months. And he says, I can't give you a price until I finish. Oh, no. So, but they're doing so much construction out here that they sheet metal people making ducts and planums and all kind of stuff, pans and everything for heating and air and plumbers and stuff like that. So he said, I'll get to you in about 3 months, maybe. So I went and bought me some sheet metal and took the grinder and start cutting it, fold it. I got a 1 inch and a half trough underneath it, Val. So when it comes off, it goes in the trough, it goes into the tank. So it works good.
How big is your tank?
It's a 50-gallon tank. Because what I'm counting on, they shut the water off here for irrigation and stuff like that in the fall. So I wanted enough to carry me through a few more months without me going and drag a hose out of the garage all the way to fill it back up, a smaller tank. So, but then as soon as it gets, I guess, November or so, like that area, I'll end up closing off the wet wall. I put some U-channel all the way around it and got that wiggle wire. And I'm gonna just take some couple layers of, I guess, bisqueen, whatever, and seal the outside up and then go inside and wrap the, the inside front so I don't get a breeze coming through it. But the fans work great. I mean, pull it, they cut on and off, but every hour and a half. So
James, what are you dripping the water through?
a
Cardboard.
wet cardboard regular evaporator cooler coils.
Okay.
They
You didn't
they
haul
had,
halide with you.
huh?
I said you
No
didn't.
halide. Couldn't bring none with me.
No.
But Home Depot were closing out a certain brand of dehumidifiers or evaporator coolers, and the only ones they had was 8 inches thick, 40 inches long and 8 inches thick. He says, well, we're gonna eliminate them. He says, you can have them for $20 a piece. I said, how many you got? So, yeah, because the new model, the new brand, they're $85 a piece, 8 inches thick. So I find the 8 inches thick really is no problem with the air pulling through it. So, I mean, the other day it got up, I guess, a little over 100, 101. I turned the thermostat down, it stayed 75 degrees inside. So I wasn't gonna fight it. So I raised it back up to 86 or 80, 85, 86 now. But we're in the 80s, lower 90s a day here and there, mostly mid 80s to upper 80s. And it keeps you cool. And the second fan will cut on if it doesn't quite keep up with the thermostat. It'll cut on, and 5 minutes later, you need a jacket.
James,
Sounds
have any of
nice.
your neighbors been intrigued with your construction?
I talked to one next door to me here, and I told him I'm finished grinding and cutting and putting screws in sheet metal. He says, that's all right. They're starting my landscape in the backyard. You can hear the equipment for 4 or 5 days. I said, that's fine. So, but the polycarbonate works pretty good inside and outside, because I doubled it, because I talked to one of the places in not in Florida, and he says, if you can seal it up enough with 1.5 inches airspace between it, so you don't change your R factor about 15 degrees or 15 degrees, So I got some more
Do you have double
polycarbonate.
layer polycarbonate?
Yeah, I've got eight mil on the outside, and I found 6 mil local. And they were doing a clearance on that too. So I bought all 12 sheets and put them on the inside because the way the frame's made as a Quonset hut, completely round or completely curved, there's no brackets or anything in the way. So it just fit evenly all the way around.
That's convenient.
And I just ordered 2
All
packs
right.
of those 1-inch washers, and I put the screws in all the way around, and just as smooth as you want to see it.
All right, well, we got 15 people here, so let's go ahead and jump in. Sorry to cut you off, James.
That's all right, I'm off.
No, I appreciate. I'm enjoyed hearing about it. I wish I could do a wet wall. Well, anyway, welcome everybody. This is the September meeting of the Baton Rouge Orchid Society. We're gonna just go ahead and get started because I think everybody knows everybody pretty well. But I'm gonna share my screen real quick, and I've got some photos from the conservatory. That can you all see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Let's see. Well, we have some pictures from the conservatory that should pop up in a second that are right after Ida, where we had, there we go. Wanted to, y'all seeing it now?
You see the agenda now.
How about now?
Your desktop now. There.
Okay. Hopefully it'll pull.
There you go.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Anyway, it's just some photos. There was a fair amount of wind damage. Nothing catastrophic. I don't know, Frank, if you wanted to speak more specifically to it. I kind of didn't see it until it was after this. But if people are interested in how things looked, I've got a little bit of a video where I was walking through it on a day with Hal and Pat and Frank that I can show.
Yeah,
Can't
this
believe-
was
Can't believe
this was a mess. I had 2 high school students help clean it up, and then Frank has taken a video where everything's been picked up. It still needs some work, but you can see everything is picked up. It's neater looking in there. There's still some plants that need to be set back in the pot. Kim Kinsel went in there day before yesterday, and he said he repotted some stuff.
I can't believe all that styrofoam came out.
Isn't that amazing?
Just blew around. I'm sorry.
Oh, it was out in the parking lot. See where those cars are? It was all up in there. We picked up a couple of bags of it. And most of it was the stuff that we had potted up in June and July. It wasn't the stuff that had been in there for a while, but you can see how it looks neat now. But there's still some work that needs to be, a lot of work that needs to be done in there.
All right. Well, yeah, and I apologize, y'all, if the video is a little jumpy. I didn't shoot it with the intention of showing it in this context. So,
So plastic on that left side, look in the.
There's no
plants
plastic between. There's no plastic between it. It's all down.
Are the plants on that side doing okay with the sun?
Yeah, we moved. I think Hal helped me move some off of there, and Pat did. And there's still some seedlings that are still being exposed over there. Last time I haven't been able to get over there because of my legs and some business. But when we were there last time, nothing looked like it was really. There was very little damage plants. There was just plants that needed to be repotted.
Great.
all right. Well, next I want to take a minute real quick to present and, well, first of all, to thank Jim Morrison, our outgoing treasurer, and as Jim has been very, very helpful to me in my first year as president. He's been great with the technology and very giving with his time in terms of helping along with it. And so the board got together and at the board's insistence or suggestion, we have presented or would like to give Jim the Orchid Digest Diamond Award. And so if y'all will allow me to read from the text that was submitted to Orchid Digest. The Baton Rouge, Louisiana Orchid Society presents the Orchid Digest Diamond Award to Jim Morrison. In 2014, Jim was required to do a presentation for Master Gardeners and chose orchids for his topic. His program was a big hit as he dressed in his orchid shirt and wore a safari hat. He was hooked on orchids. Jim has served as treasurer for 3 terms, making sure that even with our hurricanes, our books stay positive. He was instrumental in beginning the LSU Orchid Conservatory. During the pandemic, he hosted the Culture Club to offer advice to beginners. Jim has moderated all of our society's Zoom meetings during the pandemic until very recently, and I think his absence has shown. But we're doing better. Jim has helped reclassify show classes for the Schroga region so they are easier to understand. He created a comprehensive computer program for orchid shows to make AOS judging easier, to automatically print out show labels and to keep track of show awards. Recently, he created a new website for the society that you can find at Wild Apricot, which includes a store where members can buy plants. Jim even has a orchid blossom painted under the hood of his bright red Corvette, which I believe there's a picture of somewhere. So hopefully Nancy has been able to deliver the award to Jim, and we'll hear from him maybe a little bit later. I'm going to pass it off to Frank Zachariah, who is going to introduce.
Yay, Jim. All
Huh?
right, well,
Oh, hey,
I
Jim.
had the
Okay,
same-
good.
Yeah, I had the same information you had, Frank, and we had to pare down what we sent to Orchid Digest to 200 words. That's what Orchid Digest requires. So we had several more paragraphs in there that I have now lost. But Jim's been very instrumental in everything that's been going on in the last few years, and I'm really grateful to him for what he's done for putting together that the show whatever it is, the show program where we can actually bring our plants in there, the labels get made, all of the information stays with us, so that we're probably one of the, if not the only one of the few organizations that actually can tell you who won awards there. So, and the year before, because we have track of all that, and he's been very good about stuff like that. So
thank you all very, very, very much for recognizing that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Yay.
And Jim, we have a board opening if you would like to.
Right.
We're keeping it open for you.
All right. Well, so Frank, I'm just going to turn it over to you now to introduce Glenn, then, and Glenn can get started with the program.
Wait, you turn it over to me or to Glenn?
To you to introduce Glenn, I thought.
Oh, Glenn. Okay, I didn't know that. Oh, that's what that little message was. I see. I just caught that. He got me like 5 minutes ago. Well, let's see, Glenn. Glenn's kind of a newer member, and he's growing some of the better orchids. He's the guy that's taking a lot of the pictures on, if you see the Facebook stuff and the newsletter. Almost all those pictures are from Glenn. So he's been in there a lot. He asked me questions a lot, which means that he's interested in learning in fact, he got me a couple of questions today, but doesn't mean I know the answers, but we can both look at it. But he's a very instrumental member of this organization now, and I think I'm the one that suggested he do the vanilla because I was interested in it. He's been pollinating his plants, and it was kind of interesting how he went it. And I'm going to let him just show y'all exactly what he did. Okay. Okay, Glenn, your turn.
All right, sounds good. I'm gonna share my screen and make sure it all comes up. Everybody see that?
We see you.
Hang on, maybe it's coming. You should be able to, I may have forgotten to hit the share button. Let's see. Let's try this. Maybe it'll work now.
Yeah, it's starting.
Ooh, that's impressive.
Can you see that now?
Yep.
All right, so it looks like, okay, so yes, Frank had asked me about doing this presentation. I didn't have a presentation at the time, and now I do. So one of the things I plan to do is update this over time so that in the future it's actually better than it is today. And I'm certainly no vanilla expert. I'm certainly no orchid expert. So this is really just a compilation of a lot of the things that I've learned so far, some things that I'm still yet to learn, but looking forward to. And so I'll try to context that as we go through. I think it'll be a lot better if you guys have questions on a particular slide, or you think of something that we've already talked about and you want to go back to. Feel free to ask along the way. I know different presenters have different preferences. I just soon have the discussion along the way. And if it's
Okay, Glenn, I have a question. Are
Yep.
the vanilla are the vanilla flowers green like this, or I thought they were white?
So it depends on the species, but vanilla planifolia, which is what this is what I understand that it is. This is about the right color. Now you'll see some pictures later in the presentation. It kind of depends on the light during the day. The time of day, you'll see a little different, a little more yellow, a little more green, but the white ones are likely a different species.
Or could it be maybe it's grown at a different temperature?
I looked at lots of different pictures over the last 6 months or so, and most of the planifolia ones look a lot like this.
And this is your picture?
Everything in this presentation you'll see is mine, except where it's either noted on the page or I'll mention it. But the 90% of what's in here is all pictures I took this year, over the last couple of years of the vanilla that I'm growing.
Okay, all right.
But folks, feel free to ask questions as we go. I'd say try not to go to places we haven't covered yet, because then I'll just say, oh, let me cover that later. If you have a question, I will. But if it's something we've already covered or we're on the page covering, please feel free to ask. So one thing I thought when I first started learned about vanilla, it brought me back to when I was a teenager. So when I was a teenager, I was fortunate enough to get a chance to go to Hawaii. And while I was there, I went to go on a tour of one of the pineapple plantations. And on the way there, on the drive there, we were passing through these fields of crops. And the bus driver pointed out that that was a field of pineapples. And I don't know about you guys, but at that time, I had never thought about how pineapples grow. And when I saw out the window all these pineapples growing on the ground like a cabbage, it struck me as really strange and different than what I had imagined, even though I hadn't actually imagined how they grow. I think I must have thought they grew on trees, but pineapples grow in kind of a bush on the ground. And after that trip, I learned that you could slice the top off of one and plant it and it would grow. So the next time we got a pineapple from the store, I sliced the top off of it, planted it, and 15 months later, I had a pineapple, which was pretty cool. And so when I learned in one of our meetings that vanilla was an orchid, it's like, what? I never really thought about it, but it's not what I would have guessed. And so it was really a surprise. And I guess I had that same response. Well, let me try to grow one. And that's kind of where this presentation comes from, is my interest in trying to do something that I was surprised about and curious to learn more. So just as an overview, we just talked about it. Vanilla is an orchid. A lot of people, actually most people I've run into, don't know that. And it's a vine, which is a little strange for orchid people. Not a lot of our orchids are vines. And so it's kind of curious. The picture here, my brother-in-law sent me this picture. He lives in Hawaii. He does a lot of outdoor stuff. He hikes a lot. And we've talked about orchids from time to time because he sees them, in natural habitat. But he sent me this picture of vanilla, and you can see it's quite long, and it is growing straight up that tree. Generally, those things will keep on going all the way to the top of the canopy. Problem is, with them up there, you can't do a whole lot with them, and you can't see them too well. But that is an orchid kind of in its natural habitat. They originated in Mexico, best I can understand. And there's over 100 different species of vanilla orchid, kind of depending on the exact number, kind of depends on the information you're reading. But it's universally true that planifolia is by far and away the most common commercial vanilla that's grown. Generally, there are 3 varieties or species that are used in commercial growing, but planifolia is by far 90+% of the vanilla that's being grown commercially. Vanilla is grown in over 50 countries. I saw one article that said 70 plus, but the leaders currently are Madagascar, Indonesia, and China. Depending on what year you look at, Mexico will be in there, New Guinea will be in there, and those top 5 or so don't seem to change the last 4 or 5 years, but those are the big hitters. Vanilla is semi-epiphytic, so it has terrestrial roots and it has roots up on the trunks of trees and such. And so it is an epiphyte, but it does root into the ground as well and benefits from that. They'll live year round as long as you don't get them too cold. And if you just let it keep going, this one is an example. They can be 200 to 300 feet in length. I've seen some articles that suggested folks had some longer than that. And from my experience, they do grow pretty quickly. So culture, this plant you see here is my vanilla orchid after I pruned a couple of vines off of it. And they do like a similar to a Cattleya light. They will handle, I've seen references to like 65% shade and up, and they do very well apparently, and even with a little bit of shade. They like it hot and humid. The media that they like to grow in for the terrestrial roots is kind of a light and crumbly with good drainage, so even moisture. And then once it starts to dry a little bit, it needs some more water and likes some more water. When people ask about what type of media, whether it's coconut husk, bark, sphagnum, perlite, you can mix those things together and kind of experiment. Just shoot for something that drains well, but holds a little bit of moisture for a while. A couple of 3 days is, from what I've seen, not bad. I probably messed this up a little bit when I planted mine. I had a fair amount of Miracle Grow potting soil that I mixed in with the bark. And from what all I've read since then, that potting soil is probably a little bit on the heavy side for the vanilla. And maybe because I didn't overwater it, I got away with it. But in the future, I'll be using something a little bit lighter. Fertilizer, I don't use anything special. It does like to be fertilized just like the other orchids, especially when it's growing. And man, they can grow if you give them the right conditions. The short dry period for blooming, I have some question marks there. It's kind of interesting. The different people that grow them kind of have their own observations and trial and error kind of stuff. But one of the themes seemed to be that if you give them a brief, short dry period right before they're supposed to bloom, it will help trigger. Apparently, they like to be stressed. The stress on the orchid is what a significant factor in helping it start to bloom. That's probably why mine didn't bloom sooner, because I had, 30, 40 plus feet of vine, all healthy, growing, getting plenty of light, and it just wasn't blooming. So it could have been immature still, or it may be that I just treated it too nice.
Glenn, you said you had 30 feet of vine. How tall is this piece of wood that it's on?
That structure there is about 6 or 6.5 feet tall. And I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next page. But yeah, this vine is draped up and down on that structure. And the picture here is more than that, a good bit more than that. But yeah, it's draped up and down that 6 or 7 foot structure.
And you said when you repot it, you're going to use something without the.
Well, I'm going to repot this one. It's fairly large, and the material's broken down some. Some of it is washed out. But when I grow my new cuttings, I'll be rooting them in something a little bit looser. And before I give them away, they'll be in something that's drains a little bit better than what I had originally in mind.
Does it attach to this wood?
Yep.
Are the roots attaching to this wood?
Yeah, I've got some pictures later in the presentation that'll show you that. But when I was growing it, before I had the wood structure there, it was just on a metal structure with some coated wire. And the roots did not attach to the metal. It was a galvanized metal, and they didn't attach to the wire either. They would sometimes wrap around the wire a little bit, but they wouldn't keep growing generally. And I did have a few instances where the roots just grew straight down into the pot. So they were 2 or 3 foot long, growing straight down, but I never had any try to attach to the metal or the wire. Once I put the wood structure on here, it didn't take long. Those roots started hitting that wood and then growing along the wood like you would see our other orchids growing in their pots along the clay pot or around the net pot. And the mounted orchids, the roots kind of grow along the mounted orchids. This looks a lot more like that once I gave them the wood to attach to, and the roots just seem to take off. Maybe because of the substrate, I don't know. But
Glenn, was that treated wood or was that just regular pine, or what kind of wood was that?
That is a cedar. I just took some cedar fence boards and ripped them down to about 2.5 inches wide, so they would have a little bit of a surface area. And then I sandwiched my metal trellis with those cedar boards. So that metal trellis is actually underneath those wooden boards. So they do grow fast. In this picture you can see here, that's when I brought the vanilla out of my greenhouse. It was about a month later than the other plants because I was afraid I was going to get a cold snap and I didn't want to move it twice. And that little red squiggly thing at the bottom, that was a new growth coming off from right above the dirt zone, coming out of one of the leaf nodes. And it was 7 inches tall on April 23rd when I brought it out there. Last week I checked it, and that's where that same shoot is a week ago. It was 57 inches tall, which means it's growing at 2.5 to 3 inches a week. And I wouldn't say that I fertilize this thing as well as I should, but I do give it a little bit of fertilizer, and it's in a nominally 50% shade cloth area out there. And you can see it's not overly yellowing, so the plant's handling that amount of light. Some of the leaves at the bottom are dying off, but that's not light issue. That's a rot issue on one of the small vines. As it's growing, you do need to monitor the side growth. So the vine will shoot out new growths from the various leaf nodes. And, those vines will just take off. If you don't watch them, they'll run along the ground. Or if you've got them up near something, they can take off and run up the tree or run up the pole. The problem is if they're up on a pole, you can't really get to them to pollinate them. They also don't bloom as well, apparently, based on some of the information I saw from the commercial growers. If you let them run long and lanky straight up, they tend to just keep growing and they don't bloom very well, and you can't get to them to pollinate them anyway. And so what they recommend is actually figure-8 looping the vines. And they found that that encourages the flowering. And so you can see here, the most of the mass in these pictures is kind of on the top 2/3 of that trellis, because as it would grow, you can see to the right here, I don't know, I think, can you see my cursor? This vine that's growing out here, as it grows, gravity tends to bend it down, and the tip always just keeps pointing up. Eventually this hook will be all the way down here. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I would hook it back onto the trellis and it would take back off, and I would keep doing that. But it turns out the plant would have benefited a lot more if I'd have let that vine come all the way down to the ground and let this touch the dirt or the soil, the mix, and those leaf nodes would throw out roots. The roots would go into the soil, and then the plant would take off vertical again. And they say that that really helps with the vigor of the plant as far as having some additional terrestrial roots from the shoots. So to do over again, I would have let these things come down, rooted them in the pot, or put some leaf litter and such in the little tray that my pot's sitting in, and let those plants anchor in with some additional rooting. But they do grow very, very fast. So propagation, you can grow vanilla, the other orchids, but they're a little bit problematic because the seeds get a really hard coating on them. And they talking with Tim and reading an article that he shared with me, they actually suggest, if you're going to try to do them from seed, to capture them after about 5 or 6 weeks from pollination. And the seeds are much easier to, they don't have that hard seed coat yet. But the preferred method tends to be propagating from cuttings. This cutting you see in the picture here was one, actually it's two, that I got from a potting workshop it was actually just after the potting workshop in 2018. We had the potting workshop in March, and I got this one in May or June, I don't remember which, but I believe the picture was in June, so I think I may have gotten it then. And so you can see that that's pretty heavy mix there. That is a potting soil mixed with some bark. But that is how most people are going to get vanilla, as a cutting. When you take a cutting, you can take a cutting, it'll grow from it if you have at least 2 nodes, one node to go into the ground and one node to develop the new growth and the new shoot from. The more nodes you have, the more quickly that vine is going to grow, the more quickly it will bloom. But if you're going to root it, having 1 to 3 nodes under the mix to allow those terrestrial roots to form is what's recommended. Securing them from movement. Now, I just put these in the pot and they leaned up against the wall of the pot. They didn't really want to move. I didn't worry about staking them or securing them. But just like the other orchids, they want to be still while those new roots form. You want to water it lightly when it's mostly dry, because these things are just a vine under the soil, so they will tend to rot if you overwater them. And because they don't have a lot of root development early on, to the extent you can mist the air roots, they will appreciate that. Get the cuttings into some filtered light. At least 6 hours a day is what is recommended. I put mine basically with my other orchids, so they get, light all day long. And then expecting blooms in 2 to 4 years. So if you have a cutting that's 2 or 3 nodes, it's probably going to be closer to that 4 years. If you get one that's 2 or 3 feet long, they say that those can bloom in 2 to 3 years. So this one, I got it in 2018. My first blooms were actually this year. So that was 3 years from these cuttings. So I pretty much was right on the curve. I think I might have been able to bloom it a year earlier if I had known then what I know now, and we'll talk about some of that in a minute. So taking cuttings, so you can order cuttings online if you can find them. Some folks may send them to you. You can buy rooted plants, or you can just find somebody that has a vine who's willing to cut one off and let you root it. So I got to talking about that with Hal this summer, and I was like, well, what the heck, let me give it a try. So I went out and took a couple of the vines that were growing hanging, took a long, healthy one and cut it off. I actually took 2 of them off of it. Cut it, you want to cut it just a little bit above the leaf node so that you've got the majority of that stem length between the 2 leaves on the cutting. That'll allow it to stabilize in the soil some. And what I did not do this time, because I didn't know it at the time, was to let that vine cut harden off before I potted it. So what they suggest that you do is leave that cutting for several days, 2 or 3 days, up to a week, to let the cutting harden off so you don't end up promoting rot at the end. And then go ahead and pot it up in that loose mix. You do have to make sure you put the lead end up. The plant knows the difference. Although I would tell you that if you're going to make a cutting and leave it laying around for a while, mark which end is up, or really take a good look at it so you know, because at a casual glance, because of the way the leaves twist around, it's not obvious which way is up. If you study it a little bit closer, it is obvious. But I can tell you, when I picked up these half a dozen cuttings, I had to look at it for a minute to make sure I got the right side up, because those leaves are twisted and curled, and it can be a little bit deceiving. So
Glenn, the apical bud should
Yes.
be in the top of that leaf.
That's
You
right.
know? Okay.
Yeah, the one in my hand, that's the apical growth, is the one right out of the top. But the cuttings, if I cut that 3-foot piece into 3 cuttings, which is basically what I did, only one of them is going to have the apical growth tip. And what I found is the 2 pieces that I had that I rooted, that apical tip died within a week. Now it only died back to the first leaf, beneath it, but that fresh new growth died on both tips at almost exactly the same time. So I just pulled it off. It pulled off easy because it was rotten, and the leaf node that it had come out of was fine. In fact, I'll show you a picture in just a minute. It'll show you that. But yeah, that is true. But if you have a leaf, a node in the ground, and the roots start to grow, they'll develop, and then that vine will shoot out a new growth, a new apical tip that will then.
It will make a new apical growth at the where the other one died, or it has to be at another spot.
I don't know the answer to that for sure, but I'll show you a picture. I believe it can be either. So it could be one of the lower nodes, could be where it shoots out the new growth, or it could be the new tip. I don't know the answer, but when I look at the new tip, I can see there's still a growth bud there. There's still a little nub at the leaf node. And so I believe it's possible that it could be from either. And I'll let you know how mine turn out. But
and Glenn, the only place the roots will form is at that node, right?
yeah, well, at any of the nodes,
Any node. Yeah.
Yeah, you go look at that vine on the trellis. Every single node just about has roots coming out of it. Some of them will dry up, others will grow really, really long, and others will kind of hang out in the 3 to 8 inches kind of range. But yeah, every one of those leaf nodes can put out a root, and I believe every one is capable of blooming under the right conditions.
Glenn,
Sometimes
Glenn, I think you said something about 3 nodes being planted when you propagate, and I just assume it would be natural that you would cut off the leaf
Yes.
when you planted those 3 nodes.
Yeah, that's what I've seen from the various things I've looked at. And the one that I had originally, that is what I did. To be honest, I was kind of in a hurry when I did these, and I did not cut the leaves off. So we'll find out how critical that is. But so far, what I think is because the mix is really loose and drains really fast, I don't think those leaves, even though they're a half inch under the soil or an inch, it doesn't appear to me that they're rotting. They still appear to be growing, green and healthy.
Glenn,
But yes, my understanding is it's best to go ahead and clip those off.
Glenn.
Yeah.
Bob Danka. I've done this twice and I had really good luck laying these cuttings horizontally in a pan and just lightly covering the nodes,
Yes.
because it seems like they have a better chance of sprouting growth before they rot.
Yes, that is the other way that they recommend to do it, is just lay them and cover them with some loose material, just very loose, very little. The vine is very hardy. It wants to live, and it can certainly grow that way. You will have potentially multiple plants coming from that same vine, and then you could just clip the vine in between the new growths. And that is definitely one way to do it. I'll probably do that next time. What I wanted to do this time was plant them in the upright position, and see how that goes, just to get a sense of how it behaves, how the roots grow, and what works and what doesn't. But that is how many people do it. So this is a close-up of that cutting. So I cut those on August the 6th. This picture on the right is, I guess, a few days ago, which was 5 weeks from when I cut that cutting. And you can see there's already a new growth coming out of that leaf node that was right below the fresh cut. You can also see how that fresh cut healed over and dried out, right? So that's what they're talking about when they say let that vine lay around for a few days to let that fresh cut heal over before you go and pot these things to try to get them to grow. And if you leave it laying on the surface, like Bob just mentioned, it's going to do that automatically. So that is a new growth after 5 weeks. I also didn't take a picture, but some of the roots that were right above the soil have actually grown about 1.5 inches and are going down into the soil. And several of the air roots have actually put on 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch new growth coming out of the tip of where that root was when I cut it off and started. So the cuttings look like they're all, and looking forward to seeing how these things progress. The other thing that was interesting is, so that was 5 weeks, and that growth tip is maybe 1/2 inch long. This is the other side of that cut. This is up on the trellis. I cut them off at the top. Don't know if that was the right or the wrong place to cut them, but that's where I cut them. And that growth bud right there is a couple of weeks after I did the cutting. Remember, August 6th was when I cut it. This is August 30th. This is September the 4th. This is September the 8th. And this is September, I think, the 13th, my little Zoom thing, the 12th is covering that. So in that same 5 week period, the tip that grew on the cutting was only 1/4 to 1/2 inch long. The cutting on the main vine is 8 inches long. So to me, that's illustrating the benefit that this new growth is getting from all of the vine and the roots and the leaves for the mature parent plant, really pushing the energy to that growth bud. The other one that I cut is exactly the same. If I took pictures of it, I just didn't include them here. The growth rate is exactly the same. The length of that new growth is within 1/4 of an inch the same. They're really healthy, really taking off fast. So What I don't know is, was it better to take it at the top and let this new growth weigh itself down towards the ground so that I can root it in and let it grow back up? Or should I have cut it, near the ground and let it grow up first? I don't know. I don't know ultimately if it's going to matter. Next time I'll probably cut one from down low. Most of the growers that I saw cutting them tended to cut them down low. So there may be some reason for that from a commercial growing perspective. For hobby growers, I don't know if it really matters. I also didn't know that cutting would promote the new growth, but clearly it does. And they also say that cutting it is one good way to stress the plant, and that if you do that, one article I read said 2 or 3 months before bloom time. Another one said 5 to 8 months before bloom time, it will promote flowering. I didn't include any pictures here, but I also read in numerous places that other ways to stress the plant help it bloom as well. People would bruise the vine with tie wraps or plastic right behind where they cut it, like at the below that leaf node I have in this picture. They would take a tie wrap and abrade the surface of the vine. I saw a toothpick way through, or I guess evenly, and they would poke it all the way through the vine. Another one, they were actually burning the vine with a cigarette, all in the name of stressing the vine, because it's been apparently proven that helps improve the blooming. I guess because it is worried about dying and wants to try to put on some pollination opportunities. So one thing to caution you guys about, I did not know this, but apparently the sap from the vines can cause moderate to severe dermatitis, irritation, skin irritation. They do recommend you wear gloves and be cautious when handling the cuttings, when you're doing replanting, even when you're picking the beans, the seed pods. The sap, they say, some people react more strongly to others. Even the flowers, they say, can cause irritation. Now, I have fooled with the flowers. I've fooled with the plants. I've never had any indications of any irritation, but I have been cautious not to get the sap from the cuts on my hands. Maybe next time I'll get brave and just dab a little bit there to see what happens. But they vary everywhere that I looked at. They caution about the sensitivity to the sap.
Glenn, when you cut that vine, did it put out one growth or did it put out multiple growths?
Right now, there is only one growth just preceding the fresh cut area. So the node behind the cut, each of them have a new growth, but I've only seen one new growth. So the other thing that going along the way is when this was pictures when it was in the greenhouse last winter. This actually, the date's on there, February 28th. When it first started to poke out a new growth, what I thought was a new growth, I didn't know. I'd never seen one. I didn't know if it was the new growth. Is it a big root? Is it a flower bud? So that started in early February. But by late February, the one on the far right was the one that came out first. It became pretty evident to me that this is a flower bud, not a new growth or a new root. And so these 3 pictures are the 3 flower buds I got this year. Actually, I ended up with 4, but these were the 3 that came out first. And so just to show you kind of what the new buds look like if you have a vine and you're asking the same questions I did. Is it a root? Is it a new growth? Is it a flower bud? It actually is pretty obvious that it has multiple what look to be small leaves, whereas a new growth, it comes out without those things. It just tends to make the vine in one leaf. So now that I've seen it, I know what it looks like. I'll be able to tell very quickly. But at the time, I did not know, so I took these pictures. That was February 28th. March the 20th. So you can see all of those have developed pretty well. what I would consider a little slow compared to the rest of this vine's behavior. But that's what the buds looked like almost a month later, 3 weeks later. This is April the 10th. You can see now you're getting some definition on those buds. You can start to see what the flowers or where the flowers are going to be. And this is just before, the picture on the left is just before my first flower opened. And the picture on the right, you can see, if you look at where my cursor is, this is where that flower was. It fell off the next day. So this one ended up opening the next day. And a few days later or a week later, this is what it looked like. And that'll become important later in the discussion. And this was my first flower ever of vanilla orchid. I can say I was smiling that day for a few minutes, but then I was confused because I didn't know if it was opening or closing. I had always heard that they didn't stay open for long, but I didn't know whether to believe it or not. Surprise, surprise. And I called Frank, said, hey, what do you think? Does this look like it's opening or closing? He didn't know either. So this was a pretty exciting day for me. It was the equivalent to my pineapple. I was able to grow this thing and make it bloom. Turns out it was actually closing. That was at 2:40 in the afternoon. The rest of the day went by. That flower finished closing up, and I got my answer. So I made it a point to take some pictures so that I could illustrate this if someone didn't believe me or was curious. So this was at 5 o'clock in the morning. You can see in the background, the sun has not come up yet. That's what that flower looked like at 5. And I can tell you just about every other flower that bloomed this year for me, which was in the order of about 20 of them, they all did almost exactly the same thing. They started out before daylight, something like this. By 11 o'clock, they were essentially full open. Sometimes the sepals were a little more pushed back, but generally that flower had a habit that looks a lot like this. By 3 o'clock, it was half closed up. By 5 o'clock, it was almost all closed up. And so I can say without a doubt, they're only open for a few hours during the day. The typical bloom time is between January and June, depending on what part of the globe you're in and what your weather's like. So you can see these were, late April, early May timeframe was when 3 of my 4 flower clusters bloomed. And I'll say that they do only open one at a time, mostly. I did have an instance twice where 2 flowers were open at the same time. But again, that was definitely the exception, not the rule. These things very reliably bloomed sequentially 1 or 2 days apart until all of them had bloomed on that cluster. So anatomy.
Glenn, they normally bloom in late spring, or do they bloom like longer periods in other areas?
Everything I read I think I've read something, or maybe you told me something you had seen. There were some other minor periods. So what I was actually doing, since I cut this thing on August the 6th, which is kind of well after the spring bloom period for us, I'm curious to see if in late September or October it blooms again. So I will let you know. But most of what I've read suggests that they're going to tend to bloom in that dominant cycle in the spring. But maybe we'll see something different since I stressed it pretty good in early August. We'll see what happens. So one of the things that I did not know about and had to learn, and I was a little anxious to go see the flower, was the rostellum, which is a flat that's between the male pollen and the female parts of the column or the orchid. I'll probably use the wrong terminology, but I didn't know what that was. So I had to go look and watch some videos. And sure enough, when I went out there to pollinate that flower, there it was, exactly like the videos. Worked exactly like they said it would. And you can see how it does its job. So where the pollen is in the typical place here under the anther cap, the rostellum is a little flap between the anther cap and the stigma or stigmata, whichever is the proper terminology, which is where the sticky part is, and the pollen goes to fertilize the orchid. The column is the same, the ovary is the same. And this is an actual picture from one of my flowers. You can see a good picture of the anther cap, the column with the lip torn away. This is what that flower looked like before I tore the lip away so I could see what was going on in there. But that's what it's going to look like when you walk up to it. This lip envelops the column pretty much all the way around and extends past it. So to get in there and lift the rostellum and do the pollination, you pretty much have to either completely remove the lip or at least, like I did, rip it down the sides and get it out of the way.
So Glenn, so the picture on the left, that's upside down? Because in the stigma underneath?
Yes, the stigma is up under the column right here.
Right. Okay.
But it's not really, I don't know what you mean by upside down. So the anther cap is pointing down in the picture on the left, and it's pointing down in the picture on the right, and the one in the middle. So the orientation of all three of these is about the same. It's just one you're looking at it from the left side, and one you're looking at it from the right side.
Okay.
So
Glenn, you know what normally pollinates them in nature?
So it's a bee, and I think it's Euglossian bee, but it's a bee that's native to Mexico. And so if you're not in Mexico, pretty much everyone else in the world has to pollinate these things by hand, which is partly why getting them pollinated. I think I read some of these areas that grows them commercially can pollinate about 700 flowers a day. And so you can imagine if you've got acres and acres of these things growing on trellises that look a lot like the one I had in my picture, or some versions of that, there's a lot of flowers to go find and to pollinate each one individually. There is some, I saw one reference to in one article somewhere that they thought there was a hummingbird that could do it, but that's not, that was kind of one-off in my mind. Everything else I saw said the bee, and that it was native to Mexico, and that everywhere else has to do it by hand. Even where you have the bees, they were only reporting pollination rates in the single digits, percentage-wise, and so it's not necessarily very effective. But the way it works is that bee goes in there, get the pollen stuck to them, they get up into the orchid, and when they back out, it lifts the rostellum, and the pollen gets caught in the sticky stuff around the stigma and pollinates the orchid. So you'll see in a minute, it's not a very good picture, but I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. So generally, we talked about one flower a day. We talked about hand pollination. I would say that when you go to pollinate, it's suggested it be a little bit fluid with your movements or gentle with the flower, because the pollen can fall out pretty easily. I tried to watch for it as best I could, and I didn't see any of the pollen fall out. And I know I handled a couple of these poorly, so that may be overstated there, but I went ahead and mentioned it because it's better safe than sorry. The rostellum we talked about, you have to raise to expose the stigma. Most people I saw used a toothpick, so that's what I did, but any small pointy object will do. Some people I think can use their fingers, probably after lots of practice, but I was too nervous and not talented enough to do it with anything other than something like toothpick. And then once you raise that rostellum, the flap up with you basically, it's like it's hinged. You just hinge it up and that exposes, and then you just fold the anther cap down into the stigma, press it lightly. Don't jam it up too hard because you can damage it, but just press it in lightly. And you're gonna know within 2 or 3 days if it worked. If it worked, that flower will stay on, it'll wither up and turn brown, and the stem where the ovary is will start to elongate. I'm telling you, it's ridiculous how fast you can see the difference. It's within a couple of 3 days. The seeds mature in 5 to 6 weeks, but the beans require 7 to 9 months to harvest. So this I attempted. Next year, I'm going to try to get my own pictures so I have better pictures. These are not my pictures. I stole these off the internet to try to illustrate a little bit better where that rostellum is, what it looks like. So I tried to catch it there. The toothpick is on the wrong side of the rostellum here. The person had started to flip it up and the toothpick slipped off the end and it flopped back down. So that toothpick is not in the right place. But it was a good shot of the rostellum that you can see there. And then they repositioned their toothpick to push it upwards. And like I said, it's hinged right there. And you get it up all the way out of the way. And then you just push that anther cap back down and it'll stick. It'll stick to the sticky stuff there at the tip of the column and you're done. Just let it sit. And next thing you know, you'll have either success or not success. So here I took that same sequence of flowers earlier. This is the picture of that flower after I pollinated it or attempted to pollinate it. You can see the lips intact. And then those other pictures were after I pollinated it. I also didn't have as pictures of everything, but even when you don't touch that flower and you just let it go, it closes up almost exactly the same way in exactly the same amount of time. So my pollination interference didn't really change the way that orchid closes off on the latter part of the day. It just did its thing, whether it was pollinated or not. So this page helps show you what it's going to look like when it works. We talked about the flower shriveling and staying attached. And so if you look in these pictures, what you'll see is this flowers, you can see it's starting to turn a little bit off color. Then you can see it right here, shriveling up more. And this is it in the background here, completely shriveled up and still attached. Frank, you'll probably remember the first few of these I did. I was calling, we were talking about it. It's like, is it supposed to fall on or stay off? Well, I don't know. You thought it was supposed to stay on. I didn't know. And turns out, yeah, it's supposed to stay on. And so the ones that fell off almost immediately were clearly not pollinated. And so you can see I did that one first, and then that one was next. That's this one here. And then this one opened the next day, and that's it right here. So what's also interesting is this was the day after I pollinated that one. And you can see here, this back part is graining up a little bit at the base of the stem. You can't tell in the picture too well, but in these two pictures, this ovary already had started to swell a little bit from what it was the day I pollinated it. And you can see here, this is a week later. That thing has almost doubled in length and in width within a week. So those beans really started taking off.
So just in case somebody doesn't know, the stem that the flower is on, that's the ovary. The ovary is inside this. And then so that's what he's pointing to right there.
Yeah, so if I go back, we'll just take a second. So this part of the stem is that green part, is where the ovary is. And I was really amazed how fast. I guess I shouldn't have been, because a lot of the orchids, that changes quickly. but I was really amazed at how fast these things grew. So this is some pictures. The next few slides are just pictures of those beans maturing. So you can see these stems. This one would have been after, I guess, before the others. These top ones would have been the last ones I tried to pollinate. And you can see the flower fell off, the stem stayed upright. So that's one of the things that they say is that the flower will fall off and the stem will stay upright and it'll not turn, any darker green. These eventually turned completely yellow and light green and then just fell off. This is the same cluster from the opposite side. You can see these ones, that bean has grown, 2 inches. These just fell off and did nothing. Eventually, like I said, they fell off completely. And this is that other cluster. So this is, I guess that was on the end of May. This is June 11th. You can see they're getting a little bit fatter, a little bit longer, maturing nicely. I got a late surprise. This cluster actually I found by accident one day when I was out looking at these other beans. It kind of startled me a little bit because I had bent down to look at the beans and there was a flower staring me in the face. So I hurried up and tried to pollinate it, and then I watched that cluster. So those started, they were exactly a month. The blooms were a month after those first 3 that I had. And so my pollination rate on the first cluster was 0%, and my pollination rate on the last cluster was 50%. So I'm getting better. But these ones here really are going to grow fast. So if you look, these 2 were pollinated first week of May. This one was pollinated the first week of June. If you look in the next picture, you don't see a whole lot of different. This is only 6 days later, so not a lot different, but one of the flowers did fall off. So I can say that even if the flower does fall off at some point, it was already pollinated. It's growing into a bean. And so that doesn't have to stay on forever. But at the early onset, definitely differentiated which ones pollinated and which ones didn't. This picture is near the end of August. And you can see I actually accidentally bumped into this one and broke one off back in July. These ones grew a little bit more, but look at this guy. This is the one that bloomed in June. I pollinated in June. That bean is bigger than either of these, any of these. It's longer and noticeably fatter, and it's a month younger. So clearly the vine is growing better here, or it's putting more energy into these bean seed pods than these guys over here. And I don't know why necessarily, except it may have to do with this is getting the full heat of the summer and all the rain. These ones, were coming out of buds that developed in the greenhouse. So maybe it was a little bit on average cooler. I don't necessarily know why, but it is very visibly obvious when you look at it in the yard. These guys, for whatever reason, are growing much healthier, much faster. Harvesting the beans. So I have not done from this point forward yet, but I'll be looking forward to it. And so this is what I'll be looking for. The beans, when they get to be mature, will start to yellow on the bottom tip. And at that point, you want to get them out of there. Because after this, they'll split. The planifolia seed pods have a habit of splitting. And then once they split, you can end up with issues with mold and things getting in there and them not surviving well. So they always recommend get them off when they look like this. If you take them off before they're mature, the quality of the vanilla you get, if you process them, will not be as good. And if you do it late, we talked about splitting and mold. The which I'm not sure I'm saying right, is another species of vanilla. They say that that one does not actually have a problem with splitting. You can ripen those guys on the vine if you wish, and they will, dry up, harden up, and you can do it on the vine. But that is a very, very, very small percentage of the commercial vanilla that's out there. So once you remove them from the vine, you have to stop the ripening process. The majority of the people do that by blanching it in hot water for a couple of minutes at 160 degrees. The size of the bean changes the amount of time you leave it. For small ones, it might be 1 to 2 minutes. For very large ones, it might be 3 to 4 minutes, but it's not long. I also saw something that I think I might try instead is freezing them, so that if they're maturing at a different rate, you can wait till they're all available to then start the processing. So I may try that if I'm brave, or I may do half of them with blanching and half of them with freezing to see how that goes. Once you get the ripening process stopped, you want to go through a drying and curing process. That process takes 4 to 9 months. And what you're basically doing is releasing enzymes and getting the moisture content down. And the 4 to 9 is because there are different techniques, different processes, and some people do it faster than others. And that all has an impact on the flavors that you get and the technique that you use. So to do the processing, what they do is they heat it during the day at about 115 degrees and then sweat it by night in blankets, in boxes for about 2 months. So you do that every day for about 2 months. During the day, you can heat it with the sun. That's what you see here in the pictures. They're laid out in big bins, basically, spread out. You can do it in an oven. What I think I'm going to try is doing it in a dehumidifier, because our weather here is unpredictable and difficult to manage, and I work during the day. So I can set a dehumidifier at 115 degrees and do it, and then take them out of there, wrap them up in a cotton or wool towel, and put them in a cooler. I'm planning to just use a styrofoam cooler. So you want to kind of retain that heat through the night a little bit, and then unpack them the next day, do it again. And you do that for about 6 weeks to 2 months. And what you're doing there essentially is releasing enzymes, letting the sugars break down, and let the process start to unfold inside this bean. Once you finish the sweating process, they dry it for 3 or 4 weeks. So you basically put it in a clean, dry space. Don't worry it, don't disturb it, have some place with good air circulation. So I'm just going to leave it in the dehydrator without the fan on, and dry it out for a few weeks. Essentially what you're doing there is monitoring the bean condition. They have some descriptions for the texture. When you get them, they're all dried up and shriveled. There's really no smooth parts on it. You're kind of looking for the seed pod to wither to that kind of shriveled look. You can feel of it. There'll be some slipperiness to it, some pliability to it, and that'll change over time. The color will also tend to get darker and darker as it dries, but color, they say, is not the best indicator, because the type of bean, the environment that you grew it in can change the way the color progresses. The texture and the feel and the time is really the best indicator. And then once you finished with the drying, then you condition it in a box, a closed box lined with wax paper for 1 to 3 months. And then through this whole process that is, 6 to 9 months, the aroma and the flavor really start to set in that 3 to 6 month window. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart or the undetermined, but I'm going to give it a shot. And
I wonder who figured this out. They didn't just go in the bush and say, okay, now let's dry it for a few months and stuff like that.
Yeah. So apparently the people, the indigenous peoples in the area that is now called Mexico, because they found drawings and such that showed these vanilla beans being used for flavoring many years ago. But some of them I think can develop this way naturally. And so a lot of this process I think has been developed in more recent times to up the yields, up the quality. And so this is not how it was done originally, but I think this is what's been optimized over time to give them the best results. And that's why really, if you go read a lot of this stuff, they say that curing vanilla beans is more of an art than a science, because there are a lot of factors and a lot of flexibility with how you can get things done.
So Glenn, what does the flavor come from? Is it the seeds or the pods or the lining?
It's the seeds and the flowers. You know, the flowers have aroma, the seeds have this, but I think it's coming from the enzymes that are excreted from the lining of the pod. I don't know. I'd be lying if I said it for sure that it wasn't the seeds or it was the seeds. So I'll research that and make sure I can put it in here for future reference. But the vanillin, the enzymes and the sugars that are released during that curing process are what, as they break down, I forget what they call the chemical that they believe is kind of at the root of all that. But I just don't remember the name of it. So it's the breakdown of the compounds in the seed pod that ultimately give you the vanillin, I think is the terminology.
It's vanillin, yeah.
Vanillin with an IN at the end.
Right.
And depending on the culture and the soil and the curing process, you can end up with smoky flavors, spicy flavors, fruity flavors, all kinds of different tastes and smells. And the most complex ones, they say, come out at different times, eating it or processing it into whatever you're doing with it. But I started to write down all the different descriptive words for the different aromas and flavors that they say they've gotten out of the Madagascar ones. Were well known historically for very complex flavors. The Tahitian ones, the Indonesian ones, the Mexican ones. They all have a little different kind of claim to fame on the quality and the complexity of the flavors. But, and that's what this slide was really just about acknowledging, was that flavors are very different depending on where you grow it, how you grow it, and how you cure it. And just a little fun fact, vanilla is the world's second most expensive spice. I didn't bother trying to capture the dollars per pound, but if you've tried to go buy natural vanilla, you probably are already aware that it's very expensive. Somebody told me once it was like something like $5 a seed pod for good natural vanilla. Anybody want to guess what the first most expensive spice?
Saffron.
Saffron. You guys know more than I do. That's too fancy a spice. Yes. Yeah. It said that it takes over 100,000 saffron flowers to make a pound of saffron. And each flower only contributes like 3 fibers that have to be collected by hand to make the spice, or some craziness like that. Yes, very well educated group here. So Frank had mentioned, or somebody asked me about roots earlier. So here's a few pictures of the roots. So the one on the left and right are on the trellis. You can see they're just taking off. Yep.
And before you get to that, normally when we see vanilla, it's in a liquid form. What liquid is placed with these beans to some type of alcohol?
Yeah, if it's done per the traditional appropriate way, it's extracted with alcohol. That's right. Yeah.
Don't they? I don't. This is a question. Don't they cut it open and then scrape the inside to put in that alcohol? Or
Absolutely.
I don't believe that's how they do it for the extract. I haven't researched the extract part yet, but I will, because I'm going to do that too if I'm successful getting the beans to dry and cure and smell and taste right.
I wonder if you have to cook it in the alcohol, or you just put it in
No.
cold alcohol? No?
Just put it in and it soaks. Essentially, the alcohol extracts the vanilla from the seed pod. Typically, the seed pods only have between 1 and 3 or 4%, or 1 and 5% of the vanillin in them. So that's what you're essentially extracting out of it. But the alcohol is that for you.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, when we down in Central America, we got pure vanilla from the bean there in Costa Rica and Belize, where they get it here commercially, extract a lot of the elements from it. So the vanilla extract you're really buying is only a portion of what you can get concentrate.
Yeah.
If you can find it. And they put the whole bean in a bottle.
Right.
And they get the alcohol and stuff. And
James, is a bean slit open, or is a bean whole?
It's split. It's not scraped out, just split. And they soak it. And when they take the extract out of it, they make a heavy concentrate of vanilla. Everybody brought some back, because you put a teaspoon or a tablespoon in something you're cooking, you don't put but 1/8 of that amount when you use the concentrate. It's that strong. But commercially, they take other things from it and make other spices or stuff from the extract.
I've bought vanilla beans a couple different times, and like, yeah, if you take them and cut them in half, and I've done that and put them in sugar, just like if you're going to use sugar for coffee, and just kind of let them that it'll just fill all the sugar with an amazing flavor. Or if you just scrape the inside off and use it like creme brulee or something like that, it's vanilla plus. It's you see where vanilla extract gets the flavor from, but it's a whole other ball game. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the story.
Yeah, typically when you're going to use it, you cut them open and scrape it out. But yeah.
Also, I wanted to go back to an earlier discussion on Bob Dankus saying about laying the cutting in a pan, and Glenn, I think you were growing it upright out of a pot, and I was wondering, Bob, if the pan version grew plants out of each of the nodes.
I don't think it grew plants from each node, but I have subsequently tried to start some cuttings upright, and the pans did better for me.
So that only produced a single growth, but you were more successful in getting it to grow.
That's right.
Tyler has some laying flat like that in the conservatory, and it looks like that's just what's happening. It's not branching. It's just the end is the only part that's growing. The front end.
But Frank, his doesn't have all tips, right? Some of those had to be center cuts, huh?
I don't remember. I need to look at it again. But I know, you were showing on the vine where it did that little hook, and I remember seeing that little hook forming on some of them where it was trying to raise itself up. But it's only the top end that's doing that. It doesn't look like it's branching further down.
Some of the growers will even take when they prune their vine, if they're not going to try to pot it, they'll just throw that vine over on the side, scrape some leaves over top of it and let it sit, and they'll root and grow. And that's what I refer to in this picture. So that middle picture is, I have a box built around the pot that's growing under that trellis, and the roots have grown down the trellis and out of the holes in the pot, and they're just wrapping around, happy as can be, under the leaf litter. So you can see nice, healthy root growth just wandering around in these leaves. They really enjoyed it there. There's more, just another picture, same thing, these other side of the pot in that box. Down on the right picture, you see the white root tips all growing. The ones on the left is another corner of the box, another shot on the trellis. But the green is, chlorophyll in the roots. They actually do get chlorophyll in them. That's why the ones that were in the dark are white, and over time they will green up because they do get a little bit of benefit from the sun as well.
I was curious about how you water those again. Are they water?
Yeah, and except in the heat of the summer, I really wasn't watering them other than when it rained. I did go through a few months last year where I was spraying it every day I put it in an area where my automatic watering would get to it. So it was getting watered almost every day. So I've kind of done both, and it has survived just fine. So I'd say it's pretty forgiving. But maybe because my soil was a little bit heavier, I got away with less watering.
But they're outside right now, right?
They stay in the pasture under shade cloth from April till November. And if we have a long dry spell, like we had about 3 weeks there where it was not raining at all, I watered it a couple of times then at the pot, and it caught the mist from my Vanda mister. I didn't turn it on all the time, but I would turn it on a couple of times a week to mist the upper part of the whole thing. But that was probably because I felt bad more so than I think it had to have it. I think it's actually been pretty tolerant of the dry.
Did you fertilize it, Glenn?
And then these are just a few of the pictures that I took as I was before.
Glenn, were you fertilizing? I don't know if you heard Russell's question.
I did not hear Russell's question. So I have fertilized it, I would say, twice a month with an MSU fertilizer for reverse osmosis water. I have a dehumidifier that I use the water of for fertilizing, and I mix it in with that, and then I just spray it on I spray it on with a sprayer. So I've done that like twice a month since May. And you can see they really are a pretty flower. And Frank, you had mentioned earlier about them being white. I'd say these ones you can see have some yellow to the one on the right, but I would say almost all of these color variations are mostly time of day, sunlight kind of things. They were all pretty much that green tinted color, that light green to yellow, greenish yellow kind of color with a yellow lip. And I think that's all of them. There's some, you can see in that picture on the left, some more pollinated pictures where the flower is shriveling up, turning brown. You can see that's in the morning, so that other flower is in the process of opening up. That was right before I went to work one day. And there's another couple of them that were post-pollination activity. You can see that the lip had been torn away and the anther cap is visible. And this was one with just another shot of those beans with my hand in the picture so you can get a sense of scale. Those beans are anywhere from 4 inches to 7 inches long. Maybe the longest one's 8 inches. And that was it. So is any questions you guys had that didn't get asked along the way?
Glenn, I've always read that it was a 12-year-old slave boy who figured out how to pollinate vanilla many years ago. I've read that many times.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I have no idea.
When
So
do
I
you plan on
thought-
picking, when do you plan on picking those beans?
Well, I pollinated them in May and June, so I'll be looking. I'm going to pick them when the tips turn yellow. So it's more on the condition based than time based. But they say 8 or 9 months. So February or March, if that holds true.
And that's when they start blooming again, right? Oh, that's when they start making new flowers.
Yeah, it'll have new flower buds probably in late January, early February. They say that the vines have a useful commercial life of 10 to 12 years, assuming I can keep it alive. I don't know if that's because the new growths will continue to bloom, or if just buds on the old vine that didn't develop will develop in the future. So next year I'll get a sense of whether the buds that come out are on the older part of the vine or just the parts of the vine that grew this year. I don't know the answer to that.
Glenn, did you happen to read anywhere or understand that the plant needs to be repotted with fresh soil or?
No, actually, I think what I read was they recommend not doing that because they don't like to be disturbed. So I've seen a number of things that talk about them when they're, young plants, they're a foot from your cuttings to planting them out, or when you get a plant that's 2 or 3 feet tall and it outgrows the little 4-inch pot that you got it in. Certainly see a number of things about that. But on a more mature plant, the things I've seen suggested that you didn't want to keep disturbing it.
Question.
And if you don't pot it in anything too heavy, right? It likes that kind of loose, rotting, mulchy leaf litter stuff. So that's probably why it's not necessary if you don't plant it too heavy. Bob, were you going to say something?
Yes, please. This 10 to 12 year commercial lifespan disturbs me because my plant is approaching that and I have yet to see a flower. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
What kind of torture do you recommend to get the damn thing to bloom after all you've read?
So after all I've read, and assuming that the bloom period is in kind of where mine did, which is right in the middle of the kind of suggested period, then I would say there were different things about when to stress it, 2 to 3 months versus 6 to 8 months. So I'm going to split the difference and call it 4 or 5 months. So I would say in December or early January, I would, if it's a big vine, I would cut the end of it off. If it's too small, I wouldn't bother cutting it, but I'd cut the tip off of the growth tip. And then the thing I thought I saw that I didn't like the jamming a toothpick through the vine, although that was kind of interesting. And I don't smoke, and I just couldn't get comfortable burning it. So what I would do is, what I saw them do is they took a tie wrap, a little small tie wrap. They cut the end, cut it, and then went back to the between the leaf right below where they cut it and the next one. So the next previous full segment of vine, and they pulled that tie wrap in to where it was essentially snug on the vine. And then they rotated it to bruise the outer portion of that vine. And then they would pull it up like one more notch to just snug it some and slide it around a little bit, bruise the surface. I wouldn't say they were cutting into it badly, but they were just bruising the surface. And they did that on each of the places where they cut it. And that was probably, to me, the one that was more palatable. So I would cut the tip and bruise the vine in December and see what happens.
Do you remember where you
it's
read
getting
about?
And then don't water, deprive it of water for, a few 2 or 3 weeks. in the January timeframe. So a few weeks after you stress it, cut the water back for a few weeks and give it a little bit of a dry spell. And you should get some blooms if all this stuff is true.
Do you have any idea if you got those cuttings from me?
If you brought cuttings to the Bros meeting in 2018, then I did. And
I brought cuttings sometime. And frankly, I asked that question because I'm beginning to wonder if different vines, cultivars, vary in their propensity to bloom.
I do not know, but I've searched a number of different flower pictures trying to kind of get comfortable that this was planifolia. I'm convinced this is planifolia. And that is like I said, that's 95 or 97% of the commercially grown vanilla is planifolia. So I would say if you're the only, as far as I know, nobody else has ever brought, only one person since 2017 has brought vanilla cuttings to the meetings that I know of. And I made probably 90% or more of the meetings. And so if you brought them, then that was probably you. And that means this is your plant.
Could be.
Bob, I thought you had a variegated. I thought I'd got a cutting from you several years ago that was a variegated plant. I was going to ask the question about any kind of disease because my plant grew to about 8 foot tall and then just started wilting. And that's why I asked the question about repotting, because I could only assume the roots were rotting or whatever. Are there any diseases or pests that you found out about?
They said the vanilla is prone to some rot. So fusarium rot, or whatever that right terminology for that is a bad one. Vanilla gets that a lot, and root rot. Occasionally there's some pests, but rot is the thing I saw most prevalently cautioned about on vanilla. And so a lot of the commercial places proactively treat for fusarium because once they get that, it can wipe out, whole orchards of vanilla vines or whole, pastures or large sections of their crop. But that was something that they did caution about, just root rot and vine rot. Yeah.
Well, that must have been some of, because I took cuttings of it and kept trying to grow it, and it just kept dying back. So it never, none of it lived after that. So I just assume it must be something like that.
Yeah.
And is a commercial vanilla growing operation called a vineyard?
I don't know.
Okay, that was just a guess.
I guess it would be grammatically correct. Whether or not it's the accepted wisdom, I don't.
Thank you for that.
That's one of the best programs I've listened to, Glenn. I think I know everything about vanilla now.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.
Very good.
Yes, indeed.
I really enjoyed the progressive photos to really see how things were changing. I thought it was very, very informative and really interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it was great. That was one of the better programs and the best information I've ever heard on vanilla. Thank you for putting it together for us, Glenn.
You're welcome.
And I came in late and I got a lot out of it because I have a 9-foot oak limb in my greenhouse that I have it on, and it's been growing, but I think it gets too cold because it's right against the side of the greenhouse. And I'm probably gonna have to move it a little away from the side of the greenhouse.
Yeah, most of the stuff I said, I saw, showed, not to let them get below 45 degrees. I had used kind of James's general guidance that if I wanted my orchids to keep growing during the winter, to keep them above 50 or 55. So I was paranoid about the vanilla, and I really wanted to be successful with trying to get it to bloom, and I didn't want it to die. So I kept it above 50. And those new buds were springing out in late January. So I can't speak for 45, but I know if it stays above 50, it'll be okay. And you grow a lot of vandas, so that should fit right in with.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it was when it got really, I almost lost it one winter, and it got really cold, and the log is hanging on the side of the twin wall. And I think that side did not get enough heat, and I almost lost it, but then it started coming back and it's growing fine now.
Yeah. I mean, they basically everything alluded to these vines being actually very hardy, X the rot issue. But they talked about, just throwing these cuttings off to the side, and lots of times they'll just take off on their own, So I didn't appreciate the hardiness. I was always worried about getting something done with them quick, which is why I planted them the day I cut them. Actually, the hour I cut them, probably the 10 minutes that I cut them, I got them in a pot. But yeah, I did exactly the wrong thing. But I think my soil that I used was light enough, and I kept them from getting too wet for the first week. And so I think it probably healed okay in there. Which also means after assuming these cuttings all survive, I've already promised a couple of them to folks, but I should have a couple of extras. If anybody wants one, let me know sometime later, and I'll let everybody know if I have some available in the spring, but I'm expecting to have some in the spring with enough roots for folks to just roll with it.
I'd love to give it a shot. So if you have an extra one, I'll definitely be bothering you for it. All right. Well, is that all we have for this evening? I don't have anything else. Does anybody else want to have any more questions or anything else they want to discuss? Any plans for getting together people at the conservatory, Frank?
First of October. I can't make it before then. Anybody that wants to go over there, Kim did it on his own. And anybody that wants to go over there, I think he put a bunch of plants on the ground. I don't know what that was all about, but he said I didn't have plate. So there's some plants, as far as I know, in the aisles now. But yeah, we'll do it again 1st of October, unless anybody wants to go there otherwise. We need to do more programs like this. That was just a really good program. Really good program.
Definitely. All right. Well, everybody, thank y'all. Thank you, Glenn. Jim, thank you. And we'll all speak again in a month or so.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Good night,
Yes,
all.
everybody.
And again, thank you so much for the award. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Jim. You deserve it.
You're welcome, Jim. Yeah, absolutely.